dedicated to empowering you with information
to make positive choices
and be advocates for your overall well-being.
Welcome to The Health View. Welcome to The Health View. I'm Yvonne Dunitz, and this is Dr. Laura Chan and Dr. Margarita Ochemaya. We're delighted that you're with us today, and our topic today is seasonal changes and your health, which is important because in the fall of every year, and generally in the spring of every year, we either put those clocks back or put them forward, and they can cause a change. So let's talk about the medical aspects of what happens to our bodies when those clocks move. So would you like to start?
Yes, absolutely. Being on Earth for so many years and understanding our relationship with the sun is extremely important for our humanity, as you will know also in your training. And very importantly, we relate to the sun in very, very many ways, but just within the last maybe 50 years, and I would say more specifically in the last 20 years, sleep medicine has become a very significant part of our health. And so it's either the concept of lack of sleep or too much sleep, and how we relate to that sunlight. And especially in the cases where, for example, a nurse who does shift work, or people who are working in the night shift and don't always get to see the sun, or people who might live in Alaska and might have days in which there is no sunlight. There is a significant influence in our body and how it's operating, and specifically, it actually connects with our hormones.
And we have rhythms within the body, right?
Rhythms, it's called the circadian rhythm. So that rhythm is how our body understands day and night. And then, of course, as a woman, we also have rhythms for the month. Yeah. But on that note, the hormones that are specifically associated with that circadian rhythm are produced in a gland called the adrenal gland. And we've talked a little bit about it in our show, which is the gland that is right beside the kidneys. And it definitely needs to be turned off. Because if it doesn't turn off, it's an on-off gland. If it doesn't turn on, or it's constantly on, and maybe by virtue of stress, the adrenaline that you're always producing, and or with no sleep, there are some serious health situations. And the last one, a very important hormone, will be vitamin D and melatonin.
Yes.
So we'll be talking more about that.
All right then. So I know that when it gets dark out early, I hate it. I hate it myself. I just don't like it. And it really causes a change. But when you are looking at our general population from years ago, the farmers used to rise when the sun came up and go to sleep when the sun came down. So they really listened to their bodies, right?
And their bodies to the relationship with their land.
Exactly. But it can do a number on many people related to that. And we're going to get into what's called SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. But as we're looking at these rhythms and vitamin D, do you have more that you would like to share about that?
I do. I want to share from my acupuncture training perspective.
There we go.
From the traditional Chinese medicine, this is a system of medicine that was developed thousands of years ago and has been refined over thousands of years. And before we had microscopes and lab testing, the people who were developing this medicine would watch the rhythms in the human body and would watch nature, our patterns with nature. And it's a really important impact on our health. And what they've observed and what's written in the ancient texts about Chinese medicine is that as fall comes and it starts to get darker and the days are shorter, that's when we need to turn inward, and that it's normal to experience grief, a sense of loss. They liken it to the leaves falling off the trees. There's a sense of loss.
Yes.
And in our culture, I think we pathologize that. We say, you shouldn't feel grief or loss, so here's your prescription for Prozac. But it's very normal in this time of year to experience that, and rather than pathologizing it, it was in that day you just recognized it and said, oh, it's that time of year that I'm experiencing these emotions. That's normal. It fits with the loss that's happening with nature. nature. It's this cycle. And going into winter is a time of introspection. It's a time where you do spend a little bit more time sleeping. In theory, you should. This is how it's written back in the ancient texts. And that you spend more time by yourself. And it's a time to sort of go inward and plant seeds, emotionally in your life. And then they bloom and they come forth in the spring. But I think we lead these lives where we're not accustomed to these rhythms anymore. We've got lights on 24 hours a day. We're not following the rhythm of day and night. And so we're not following the rhythm of summer into fall into winter. And so when it can be a little bit normal to feel a sense of grief and loss and to go inward, we think that something's wrong with us. Now, granted, there's a point at which it can be really problematic and it's beyond normal, but I do just want to allow for the fact that to an extent it is normal and we should allow for it and honor that part of ourselves and our rhythm.
Oh, well said. That was
It
beautiful.
was very well said and very, very beautiful. And some people, as it goes beyond, can get into a state of depression.
Absolutely. And that's when it's not normal.
That's when it's
beyond
not
it.
normal. And also, there are times when the change comes that people will lean towards more food, which may make them gain weight. They'll be maybe less sedentary, so they won't be more active as far as exercise is concerned. They may stay in more versus going out, which in fact they really need to go out and get the sunlight, even if
And
it's
the
very
fresh
cold,
air.
the fresh
Yep,
air.
and indoor air quality
to
isn't always the
exercise.
best.
No. And also environmentally, be able to make within your own homes and work settings changes in that environment to help perk it up. There are wonderful lights that can be, brought on and used. Having plants, having other activities, doing things that you love. What are your thoughts related to when you see people coming in and you see what's happening within their bodies?
I bring it to the biopsychosocial model.
Yes.
And this more than ever is when it applies.
Yeah.
Because from a biological point of view, there are definitely changes happening. And
Yes.
here that we live in New England, we have situations where our sun exposure isn't going to be optimal. And vitamin D is usually synthesized in our skin under the exposure of sunlight above 70-degree weather. So in New England, if we did a roadblock, we would pretty much have 90% of the people we checked would be vitamin D deficient. Now, the range of vitamin D is something that is questionable because the range, not always that your doctor might say it's normal, but it is just above the lower limit. And so there are some discussions about what the ideal value it is. So most importantly is at a biological level, you can have your vitamin D even tested. At a spiritual level, what you said was so well said. And then at our social level, what ends up happening is that we are creatures of society. We love to get together. And when it's cold, the ability to be out there and speaking with the neighbor and socializing is a little bit more limited. The transportation's a little bit more complicated. Even digging ourselves out of the house is a little bit complicated and associated with some illness and heart disease, or in people who are very sedentary become active in shoveling and have issues. But specifically with regards to the biopsychosocial model, this is where the circadian rhythm and relating to what you said and what you said also in terms of activity, physical activity, it behooves us in our fast-paced society to find ways in which we can bring it back, reevaluate it, understand that it might be normal to see that grief and that we can process it rather than try to numb it, either with food, with videos, with TV, with alcohol, or things like that that you might be more prone to do since you're now feeling kind of trapped in.
So let's talk about that feeling of being trapped in because of the changes, the darker outside and the shorter. So we know that light therapy can be very effective related to this. We know
Absolutely.
that acupuncture can make a huge
Acupuncture.
difference. We know meditation makes a difference.
As
we know
Margarita said, vitamin D levels, get those checked and make sure they're in an optimal range, which isn't always just within the normal range on your labs. To really
So
make
to
sure
get
they're higher.
to get that checked, that would be, you know, some people go for an annual visit, and that annual visit might be in the spring or summer versus the fall or winter, and there might be a difference in that, wouldn't there?
If someone's experiencing seasonal affective disorder and it feels beyond that sort of normal sense of a little bit of loss, a little bit of blue, then it's worthwhile to really get your vitamin D checked and make sure it's up in an optimal level.
And that would be through a blood test.
That's through a blood test, and it's not always done on a standard screening test. So
And a
it's
lot of
important to
times,
ask for it.
physicians will recommend that you have a multivitamin and have it with extra D3 or something like
and sometimes that's not enough. It really depends. Someone might not be good at absorbing vitamin D if they have a history of digestive issues, such as irritable bowel disease or a lot of inflammation in their digestive tract. So maybe they're taking a multivitamin with vitamin D in it, and it's just not enough, because in order for that person to absorb it better, they need to take a higher dose.
Could they eat something that related to bringing vitamin D in? What would be a good whole food for them to
Let me
eat?
bring it back a little bit, because what ends up happening is when we look at micronutrients, which are those that are vitamins and minerals and amino acids, vitamin D is in a category that is called fat-soluble vitamin. And so the training for physicians, and I think in your field as well, is that vitamin D can become toxic.
Yes.
And therefore, that's very important. I'd like to emphasize the importance of making sure we don't randomly take vitamin D.
Well, that's why I brought that up,
right?
because some people automatically just take it and add it sometimes.
Right, and
thinking,
so being a fat soluble, it can deposit in your fat tissue and then create some problems. Excessive vitamin D can create hypercalcemia and high calcium in your bloodstream. But what we see in vitamin D is that food is supplemented with it. So, for example, it says milk is fortified with vitamin D. We see some vitamin D and calcium in orange juice, for example.
Yes, we do.
But other than that, it would be either through sunlight. And I love the point that you mentioned about our digestion, because in our population, about 8 to 10 females as compared to 1 male will have a gallbladder removal or a gallbladder problem. And being a fat-soluble vitamin means that it really doesn't dissolve in water. And without being able to break down your fats, you will not be absorbing this vitamin D, and at the same time, you won't be clearing the vitamin D of your body.
So what do you need to do if that's the case, if you've had gallbladder surgery?
Digestive enzymes would be wonderful things to do to help you break down those fats, because what is usually recommended is that they go on a low-fat diet. And what happens with that is that then they end up having more sugar, more carbohydrates, and they are more and more depleted in their vitamin D. So good fats are very, very important for our mood, for our brain, and specifically in this case for vitamin D.
So I'd actually like to follow up on a point that you were making about vitamin D and just say that it's important to eat food when you take your vitamin D, to make sure that you have something with a little bit of fat in it when you take your vitamin D supplement so that it can be absorbed well. I had a patient who swore to me, she said, I'm taking my 5,000 IU vitamin D every day, and we just didn't see a change in her blood levels at all when we were retesting it. And I said, well, are you taking it with food? And she said, no. And I said, okay, well, unfortunately we have to start over again from scratch, and then we'll recheck your levels again in a few more months. So it was interesting to see.
So on that note, maybe she had malabsorption.
That too.
You know,
Yeah.
that would be a good consideration. And then looking at vitamin D, it's very important to take it in the morning, you know, because vitamin D is a signal for the brain and the cells to let us know that the sun is up.
Yes.
So it's the way we really communicate. There's been wonderful studies in light-blind individuals in which they don't see light, but the sensors of their skin are able to trigger a vitamin D rise and fall.
Very interesting.
Yes.
I want to make another quick point about vitamin D, which is sunscreen.
Yes.
Sunscreen does not help with your absorption of vitamin D. It interferes. So people will tell me, oh, I'm getting my vitamin D, I'm out in the sun all day. But if you're slathered up in sunscreen, it really reduces the absorption of it.
Totally
I
agree.
understand that, and I was wondering if you agree. I've heard people say that if you can be outside in the sun 20 minutes each day,
That
15 to
helps.
20 minutes in the sun, direct contact, that can help.
Well, the time of year matters.
Right.
In winter, we have clothes on covering most of our bodies, so we
So
have less
how much
skin
of the body
available.
needs to be exposed to the sun?
60%.
60%?
60% of the body
So
at
that's
greater
bathing suit level?
bathing suit level at greater than 70% of your body exposed.
For how long?
And at 70-degree temperature, I'm sorry, and for at least 3 hours.
3 hours?
Yes,
So
without
Really?
sunscreen.
Without
so now we
sunscreen.
get into
So
the
now you
concern
get
about
into skin cancer.
Now you
and
see why
concern
so
about-
many people are low in vitamin D. We're very concerned
Wow.
about skin cancer,
So-
which is valid,
Yes,
very valid. So
absolutely.
we use our sunscreen and our vitamin D levels go way down. So people should be tested for it.
Absolutely. Well, what about babies and little ones? They cover them with the sunscreen. They're not without it at all.
Yeah, that's
I
why
wonder
they make
what their
vitamin D
levels-
for kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
They
you
do.
wonder if their
And they measure
levels
it.
do they measure it?
Yes,
It
I
should
think
be.
in trying to bring it together, the risk factors for actually becoming vitamin D deficient
Yes.
are if you have extremely fair skin and you burn. For example, a person who has red hair,
Yeah.
they have an unbelievable ability to burn. And so that sunscreen, your point was so valid. But interestingly, also people of darker skin, African Americans and darker skin
Yes, they can burn.
people
Yeah.
will have very low vitamin D.
Interesting.
So a higher risk of getting vitamin D deficiency is if you're of dark skin. So we have the extreme light, the dark skin. We have the use of sunblocks. We have now people who are always inside because as much as we'd mentioned the time that you have to be exposed, the heat that you have to be out in, a lot of people don't like the heat. And so therefore, they are not really outside. And so you really need to be out in Mother Nature. But lastly, when vitamin D is deficient, we have seen associations with cancer, diabetes, weight gain, depression. And so at a microscopic hormonal level, what you had mentioned so beautifully with how we relate to our nature and how that is all together, that really ties into our spiritual and our biopsychosocial model.
I'll add to your list, autoimmunity can be worsened
Absolutely.
with low vitamin D.
And
Yep.
people with low vitamin D might not know it, and as we had mentioned, the importance of having the doctor measure your vitamin D level. The vitamin D level that should be measured is at 25 OH vitamin D. And when you have low vitamin D, you might have a lot of eczema, psoriasis, depression, difficulty losing weight. And
Osteoporosis.
clearly,
Yep.
when I was working in the field of medicine and rehabilitation, when a woman would break her hip, we would also measure vitamin D levels. And the normal vitamin D level is between 30 and 100. As you can see, what a range. So I always go for at least greater than 60. Well, what I would constantly see, undetectable levels in our seniors because they're always indoors. And then with this hip fracture, in order for that hip fracture to heal, it will require vitamin D to be able to help the absorption of calcium from our food or if you take that supplement. But you could be taking a lot of calcium, and if you have low vitamin D, it's not getting absorbed.
Right.
Well, let's go into the risk factors related to seasonal affective disease. What are the risk factors that people should be aware of?
So I think very importantly, vitamin D deficiency and seasonal affective are well related, well documented. But also the lack of nature, the lack of being outdoors. And then both you and I, Laura, have a wonderful enthusiasm for environmental medicine. And the fact is that inside the home, it can be quite toxic.
It can be.
Can be.
And let's add to the fact that because you're not really relating to the sun and the day-night cycle, that circadian rhythm, your adrenal glands become very exhausted. They become flat. And rather than on and off, we have that fatigue and that sense of depression, which we'd call seasonal affective. And lastly, melatonin.
Yes.
What happens is melatonin is the hormone of sleep. But what happens there too is it also is that on and off. So we do need those low levels of melatonin during the day and high levels at night. And what I find is that my patients think that melatonin is like a sleeping pill and it didn't work for me.
Right.
You wouldn't really notice the effect of melatonin on your sleep because it will make your sleep quality much better. But you wouldn't really notice it at a cognitive level. So it might take a little weeks and sometimes even months for us to sort it out. In seasonal affective disorder, melatonin is on all the time. And so now we're feeling a little draggy.
Right.
And we might confuse that flatness or that kind of Eeyore feeling, bah humbug, for depression. And it really might lead into that. And if we add the stressors of today, maybe interpersonal relationship issues, personal issues, then we have that problem.
So when should a person go to a doctor?
I'd say when they have uncharacteristic depression, something that is they're really not able to snap out of, something that's new, something that's different, that they can't say, okay, I can associate that with this, and when that ends, I'll likely come out of it. When really they've tried some things. I would hope that someone would go to their doctor and get their vitamin D tested. But if you're in a place where your mood is such that you really can't function well in your daily life, that your relationships are getting strained, you need to go in and see someone.
Absolutely. And one of the benefits may also be of gaining resources and a team of people that can help you. It might
Absolutely.
be very effective to have a psychotherapist.
Absolutely.
Or to go see a psychiatrist. Or
Yep.
to be able to do some meditation or to get some acupuncture.
Journaling. I recommend journaling a lot in the winter. Again, going back to that traditional Chinese medicine theory, winter is a time of introspection. It's
Yes.
a time of going deep. Any
And
gardener
reflection.
knows that you don't trim your plants in the heat of summer because the energy's going out in the plants, but you do it when the energy's going down into the roots. And so if we can extrapolate from that, it's time to go down deep from a more sort of spiritual perspective and do some journaling and think about what you want to manifest in the spring and the summer. But it's a time to really do some personal work.
Absolutely.
Personal work is necessary, whereas also what happens in winter is we tend to isolate. So even though we're doing that personal work, we want to avoid isolation because we are
Absolutely.
so communal
We are.
and being in the community, and not a lot of people are necessarily gathering together for church or gathering together at the town hall. And so finding ways in which you can gather with other
In
people, your
community.
loved ones,
Yeah.
that is
Really
so
important.
important.
It truly is very important because from a mind, body, spirit point of view, human beings are made to be with one another. We need our times of silence and quiet so that we can reflect and
Yep.
go within. But we do need the time of being able to come together and to support one another, because we have found that people who feel isolated, people who feel alone, become more depressed. Their bodies begin to change inwardly and outwardly as far as how healthy they are. And it can truly affect their ability to have a long, healthy, and happy life. Now, are there any contraindications we should be aware of at all?
I think other than contraindications in the concept of being aware of the situation would be not to misunderstand that for a bigger problem, like you mentioned, Laura. But I also wanted to mention in the concept of seasonal affective disorder,
Yes.
there is a disorder of those that have it in the summer.
Yes, they do.
So
Spring and summer,
in the
that's
summer,
important.
people don't want to be outside. And so some people who dislike the heat
Right.
will go introspective and isolate in the summer.
Yes,
And
they
then
might not
now
eat
they're
as
going to
much.
have
Yeah.
maybe some issues there. So
Yeah.
it's not just of the winter, but it is far more common in the wintertime.
And one thing I want to add too is the concept of light therapy. You were
Yes.
talking how important
Yes, we
it is
started.
for triggering hormones, but you can actually get lamps that
Absolutely.
support your vitamin D production, that support your mood, and you can sit in them under the day, ideally.
Exactly.
But then if you have too much light in your bedroom at night, maybe from a TV or electronics there, then that can interfere with your melatonin production, as you were pointing out. And so
And that's what we talked about, environmentally preparing the bedroom to be a place of sleep and
Absolutely.
tranquility, and not to have
Yes.
the phones and the computers and the laptops and all the other
Yep.
things around, but to also be able to have that darkness available for people. Yeah, that light therapy does work. It is very, very effective for some people. What are the things that you found that it's been effective for people?
I think I'd like to elaborate a little bit more even on the light therapy. There are some lamps that used to be so prohibitive and expensive, but now they're more and more available with the full spectrum of the light bulb.
Any
So
that you're aware of that you'd recommend?
a full spectrum light
A
bulb
full spectrum light bulb.
or these full spectrum lights.
Okay.
And then I have been talking a lot about the Fitbit. It's pretty
Yes,
neat.
you've mentioned
but
that.
little Fitbit can track your sleep and see how many interruptions you have. And so if you have disrupted sleep, or it doesn't really require a Fitbit, if you're tossing and turning and you wake up and your sheets are a total mess. It
Drenched.
might be the drenched if it's a hot flash, or in this case, it would be that you tossed and turned all night, or you
Because you
woke up a
couldn't
couple
sleep.
times to go to the restroom. That interruption in that circadian rhythm will create some problems during the day. Daytime sleepiness and insomnia at night, or nighttime interruptions.
Excellent. So from tying it all together and saying what people should know and be able to do related to this whole topic is not to feel helpless or hopeless at all.
Yep.
To be aware of the changes within their body and to communicate it.
And to recognize that some of them are normal to an extent.
Yes,
Yes.
because
Very
we're
important.
going through and responding to the changes in nature.
Yep.
And we are
Yes.
critters of nature, are
We
we
are.
not? We are.
I'd like to add one point also from the Chinese medicine perspective, which is that way back in the traditional books and teachings, they talk about the importance of eating very simply at the season changes.
Yes.
And we interpret that today as doing some type of cleanse, but just eating simple foods, eating a little bit less just during the season change. Because it seems to me, and I've noticed this in my practice, I'm curious if you have, that people have a flare of symptoms.
That's great. If you have any questions or want to add to topics, please feel free to go to info@ycdholistichealing.com. We look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.